Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming to our virtual education workshop here at the Arlington Home Show and Garden Expo. Without more time, let me present to you our local celebrity here. It's Donald Bobby. He's going to have a wonderful workshop. He comes from Virginia Co-op Extension Master Gardeners, and he's going to talk to you about home turf alternatives, especially converting your lawn into a garden. So, without much time, Donald, take it away.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to go to the second shot here. As Jorge said, my name is Donald Bobby, and I'm a volunteer with the belong to the Master Gardeners of Northern Virginia. And let me tell you a little bit about us first. We've been since 1985 working with the Virginia Cooperative Extension, serving both Arlington and the city of Alexandria, providing public education on environmentally sound gardening practices. And we do that through a number of venues, including those that you see listed there. Of course, are a little different during COVID times in the help desk. While it was usually manned, you could walk in and just ask a question of a couple of master gardeners sitting right there in front of you. The help desk capability is modified, but it's still available by email. And so if you do have questions about plants, you can use that email address there to reach out to the master gardeners and ask your questions. Plant clinics were similar to the help desk in that they afforded opportunities for folks to come and talk person to person with master gardeners. Those were held at a couple of the farmers markets in both Arlington and Alexandria, as well as at the main library in Arlington. Those have not yet resumed, but our classes that used to be done in person are, like many other places are doing, now being offered online. And there is a lineup of classes every month. You can register over a wide variety of topics, and you can register for those classes at the mgnv.org website that you see there. An opportunity to actually see some of the plants that we're growing, gardeners are growing in Virginia and Arlington and Alexandria is at our demonstration gardens. We have 5 demonstration gardens, one in Alexandria at Simpson Park, that's near the YMCA, for those of you familiar with Alexandria. And then there's the Glen Carlin Community Garden near the Glen Carlin Library in Arlington. There's a Sunny and Shade Gardens that are both at Bon Air Park in Arlington. There's a Teaching and Tribute Gardens, which are at the Fairlington Center just off of Quaker Lane in Arlington. And then there's the Overlook Vegetable Garden at the Potomac Overlook Regional Park. The website you see there, that's the mgnv.org, and so you can reach out and get help at least by email for your plant questions there, and the Virginia Extension Service website you see marked as well. I don't know why there's difficulty doing this. There we go. Okay. But before jumping right in and talking about turf alternatives, let me talk for a minute, just brief comments and really broad brush strokes about how that neatly manicured, weed-free carpet of green grass became our ideal lawn. So, when Europeans first began arriving to what's now the United States in the 17th and 18th century, of course, they were not greeted by lawns that looked anything like the ones that you see pictured above. There are a lot of reasons for that, but the principal reason is that the type of grass used to grow those lawns, the popular tall fescues, and yes, even Kentucky bluegrass, are not native to the United States. Instead, they're native to Britain, to Europe, and parts of North Africa. And those grasses, along with other old world plants, began to be imported into the colonies from early on. And in the 18th century, in England, that type of grass was used by landscape architects like Lancelot Capability Brown, who is sometimes referred to as England's greatest gardener, who developed the English landscape style that became popular with the British aristocracy. That style emphasized broad swaths of undulating lawn growing right up to the house, copses of trees, and maybe a water feature, like a little lake or a little pond. Excuse me. And it was really a gardenless form of landscaping that replaced the formal, symmetrical, and highly ordered type of garden that was popular during the French Renaissance period. The English garden style became popular here too. You know, where most of the folks that were colonizing here came from Britain and Europe, and the style that became popular there became popular here as well. It's a style that is really available to the wealthy. And then of course what you see there is on the left, you've got Jefferson's Monticello and Washington's Mount Vernon. That style is available to the wealthy in that only the wealthy could afford to have those large areas of grass that weren't devoted to agricultural use, not to mention the labor needed to keep those areas manicured. And while some of the lawn care could be accomplished by animals grazing, a lot of it had to be done by hand, by people using hand tools like the scythe. And here in Maryland and Virginia, it's likely that a good deal of that type of work was done by enslaved people. It was a style meant to impress and a symbol of your status in society. And of course, that style became popular, not only popular with the elite, even though initially it was largely available to the elite, with developments in technology and grass seed, gradually that type of lawn, although at a much reduced scale, became popular and spread down throughout the population. And in the 19th century, in 1830, a fellow from England, Budding, had the first patent for a push reel mower, something to mow the grass with, which meant that you could do some of that work yourself without it being so difficult. Those types of mowers were widely available in the US by the 1890s. And then in 1871, a patent was granted for the first sprinkler that attached to a garden hose. So now you have a way to irrigate your grass and a way to cut your grass. As the 20th century dawned, additional technology developments with the power mower, of course, initially available to far fewer, but by 1938, Toro had introduced a type of rotary power mower that was more available to a lot of people. And then what really kind of cemented the notion of this type of lawn being the ideal for every man, not just the wealthy, was of course they didn't invent suburbia, but after World War II, the Levitts had developed multiple properties, I think beginning in New York and also in Pennsylvania and in Virginia and New Jersey and also in Maryland, of hundreds and thousands of cookie cutter type houses in attractive developments, each coming complete with its lawn and even instructions on how to maintain that lawn. And the 60s also saw the more chemicals to help you manage your lawn, synthetic fertilizers and then herbicides to help you manage the lawn. And this lawn, as we know it, really became cemented as the ideal lawn. And there are a lot of good things about grass. A grass lawn does a lot of things well. It provides a really good area for playing on for sports. It's a very tough grass. And if managed properly, if you don't water the sidewalk while you're watering your lawn, if you don't have a lot of excess fertilizers, a lawn can be managed properly. But let's take a look at what's happening. Here's what's really happening: environmental impact from our lawns. We have about 40 million acres of lawn in the US, 3 times more than we devote to irrigated corn. We use 75 million tons of fertilizer, and the danger there is not the tonnage, but really the runoff from those chemicals not being applied properly to the lawn. With nitrogen and phosphorus leaking into our waterways and causing things like algal bloom, which is fairly essentially shuts off the oxygen in the water and is very detrimental to life in the water. The majority of wildlife poisonings reported to the EPA are the result of chemical runoff for lawns. We use a lot of pesticides, and 40% of those pesticides are banned elsewhere as carcinogens. And we are putting a lot of pressure on our water supply, using about 8 billion gallons of water a day for landscape irrigation. And about half of that is estimated to be wasted. Then there's also the use of gasoline powered mowers, which contribute to carbon emission, and 17 million gallons of gasoline spilled for mowing. It's a lot. It's a kind of high cost for that ideal, and at a pretty big expense monetarily, as you see 40 billion annually on lawn care. There are, as I mentioned before, some really good uses for turf, especially play areas, because the turf grasses are very tough and resistant. They're great to use there. And in the play areas, creating pathways between areas of your lawn, that's a great way to use it, or creating little outdoor rooms for yourself in your lawn area. And the citation I have there, the site from Virginia Tech, talks about all about lawns and what are the best kind of lawn, what is the best kind of grass to grow, and how to grow it in the Mid-Atlantic region, Virginia and Maryland. Okay, but we're here to talk about alternatives really to that lawn. And so an alternative to having your entire yard area devoted to turf grass is to have some of it at least devoted to a sustainable garden. And what's good about that? Well, a garden will reduce your need for synthetic fertilizer, all of the things that are listed on the left-hand side there. You reduce your maintenance time and cost of mowing and seeding and feeding your lawn. You support native species, encourage biodiversity, and gives us a lot of pleasure. There are a lot of, if you look in the literature and you've been interested in turf alternatives at all, there are a lot of folks out there that talk about the deficiencies of a lawn, or the costs of a lawn. And also they talk a lot about why it's a good idea to, as you try to move away from solely a lawn, to move in the direction of having a part of that lawn devoted to plants, and not only just plants, but to native plants to help support the wildlife. And particularly, I'm pointing here to many of you, I'm sure, have heard of Doug Tallamy, who is a professor at the University of Delaware. He's a leading thinker and writer and researcher in this area. He's not an enemy of lawn, but he does see lawn as an opportunity to create a better environment to promote the health of insects, particularly caterpillars and bees, but that then support the entire larger ecosystem. His newest book is Nature's Best Hope, published in 2019, and he's got a couple of different themes that he talks about in the book. One is, he says that the amount of land that we have set aside now as national forests, national parks, just aren't big enough, and they're not interconnected enough to do the job of supporting wildlife in the way that he and others are thinking that it needs to be supported. He's got a really big idea, and this big idea is that we should be looking to develop national parks in our own backyard, and devoting at least part of our yard to a sustainable garden. The site that I have, the Homegrown nationalpark.org, if you're interested, you could go there and you could learn more about what Professor Tallamy is talking about. He says, okay, what if even we made it a goal to convert half of our lawn to productive native plant communities? A few slides back, I mentioned that right now we have about 40 million acres, or yeah, 40 million acres of lawn. And he says, well, what if we took half of that and devoted it to making a garden? How much is 20 million acres? Well, 20 million acres is the combined area for all of these national parks, national and state parks that you see listed here. So that gives you an idea of the magnitude of 20 million acres, and it gives you an idea of the magnitude of Professor Talamy's big idea. Okay, so let's talk now more specifically about turf transition and reduction techniques, because I'm guessing that you've tuned in here because this is something that you are interested in doing, converting part of your yard to a sustainable garden. I'm going to talk through a couple of things and kind of try to go from things that you can do to move towards garden in your yard that are easier and lower maintenance. And then I'm going to talk about some plant selection and then some actual ways that you can go about physically reducing the amount of lawn in your yard. The two websites that I have listed on this page on the right-hand side, one from the University of California Agricultural and Natural Resources and University of Maryland Extension Service, are where I got a lot of the information about how to remove lawn. And so I would recommend both of those sites. The Maryland site also has a video on how to plant a no-till garden that I would also recommend. We'll talk about no-till garden a little bit later too. Okay, so you've bought into the idea of an excitement about using some of your yard space for a garden as opposed to a lawn. What is it that, how do you start? Well, this is a little bit of a truism. You really need to think about selecting the right plant for the right place. So you need to think about the conditions in your yard. First step, really always recommended when you're looking to transition from one type of vegetation to another, is to do a soil test, because different plants, of course, are looking for more acidic or more alkaline soils. And it's good for you to know that. That'll save a lot of consternation. You picking plants only for their attraction and beauty to you could lead to a lot of frustration if you're not considering these site conditions well. How much sun does the plant, the shade and water? Those are things that you need to consider, as well as the mature plant size. When we go to plant stores, oftentimes we see plants in their starting size, and it's easy to underestimate the size that those plants will actually take when they take root and really take off in your yard. I'm suggesting favoring native plants when you make your plant selection, because that will allow you to decrease your maintenance of those plants. These are native plants, or plants that are already in tune with the local environment and growing conditions. It'll be easier in general, to grow a native plant than to grow non-natives, and selecting natives will also go a long way to increasing wildlife habitat. And don't worry, I know that Virginia, and then by extension really to Maryland, we have a lot of clay soil, but our clay soil really supports a wide variety of plants. That shouldn't be a limiting factor. There are hundreds of species that are available for planting, and so you've got a broad palette from which to select. So this is kind of if you're wanting to start and do something that's a little easier than more difficult, is to welcome volunteers. These are some pictures from my yard of some volunteers that I've welcomed. The first one is, of course, the largest one. It's a pin oak. We had a couple of larger oaks in our yard that were knocked down by the derecho back in 2012. But after in the debris and the rubble and cleaning up, I noticed that there was a little sapling growing. So I started just mowing around that sapling and being very close, very careful about how I mowed the lawn in that particular area. This picture was taken, I can't remember, maybe last year or the year before, and the tree is probably about 30 feet high now. So that was, in my opinion, a really nice addition to, this is in my front yard. It's going to help me with shade on my property, and it's going to, the oaks are one of the best supporters of wildlife, and so it's going to be good from that perspective too. Probably most people know that the common milkweed and the monarch butterfly have a very close relationship, and the monarch butterfly, depending almost exclusively on the milkweed for laying its eggs. I had, this is a common milkweed. It showed up in my yard, and I decided to give it a little space to grow. You have to be careful with milkweed. What I say there, be vigilant at it as needed. You can't just let milkweed go, otherwise it'll tend to take over more of your property than you want. And the American holly that you see there, I found growing along right next to, almost in a fence line at the house. And it was young enough that I was able to carefully dig it out and place it in a spot where I'm hoping that it will grow, and it's also a native and provide good support. One of the easiest things to do is, if short of having a tree show up in your yard, is to plant a tree. Free trees are available from both Arlington and Alexandria. Arlington focuses on canopy trees. That's really what they are looking to increase the canopy in Arlington. Alexandria is as well, but Arlington's tree giveaway program focuses on canopy trees. There's a site that you can use if you were interested in tree from and live in Arlington County. It's available to Arlington County residents, and the I think the cutoff for planting a tree in the fall is June the 25th. So you still have time to get to that website and make an application for a tree. In Alexandria, you can either dial 311 and submit a request for a tree, or use the website there, which takes you to Alexandria 311. And for Alexandria residents, you might know that that's a website that's very helpful in a number of things. It also will allow you to fill out an application for the city to plant a tree, not on your property. Alexandria doesn't plant on your property, they'll plant on public property. So for example, on the Hell Strip or Devil Strip in front of your house, that strip of land between the sidewalk and the street, that's an area where they would consider planting a tree. And they don't have a cutoff. They run things. They're running a service continuously. And when I talked with the city arborist yesterday, he said, "I'm not giving any promises of exactly when we'll have a tree if you apply for it, but you will have a place in line." If you decide to do something on your own, I'd highly recommend, well, first of all, I have the note here about calling this utility. You want to do that before digging a hole of any substance in your yard, but really reaching out to someone like the Master Gardeners of Northern Virginia, or the Tree Stewards. That's another program, but Master Gardeners of Northern Virginia will be happy to provide some advice and guidelines on the size of trees, what size trees are appropriate for different spots in your yard. All right. So these are just, I'm going to hurry through these because I notice my time now, but you can get this kind of information. This is about under canopy shade, tree shade. These are the types of plants that can grow and thrive under those conditions. And I'm going to quickly page through a couple of slides here that talk about different site conditions. This kind of information is available at the Master Gardeners of Northern Virginia website under tried and true plants, and also at Plant Nova Natives, and we'll get to that in a minute, where they'll talk about specific sites and the types of plants that could be recommended to grow and thrive there. This is a picture from a colleague's house where she transformed a shady part of her yard into a garden And these are some of the types of plants that she's got planted there. This is plants that would work well near the hell strip or devil strip, plants that can tolerate heat and road salts. Dry shade can be a challenging place to have things planted, and these are some plants that work well in dry shade. And here are some suggestions for plants that work well on sunny slopes. So what I've talked about, even this, the next few slides, I'm going to talk about some alternatives to traditional turf. There are lower maintenance alternatives than to the tall fescue and the Kentucky bluegrass that will require less maintenance in the way of less fertilizer, in the way of less requirement to grow. One of these selections is Carex. This happens to be Carex pennsylvanica, and there are a couple of other Carex that work well in this area. I've given you an example of if you have an area that you would want to devote to an alternative to turf grass to fill a 10 by 10 foot square space with this particular Carex, it would run you about $300. It gives a really nice, though kind of very soft effect. And again, the maintenance is lower than regular turf grass. Finally, fescue is another option for us here in this area. Thrives in most soil types. You can select to mow it or not to mow it. It can grow and just let it flop over, or mow it to the recommended 3-foot height. It supports like moderate foot traffic. So neither the Carex that I just showed you is not really meant for much foot traffic at all. These lower maintenance grasses don't carry the kind of foot traffic that turf grasses carry. But this does have the finely fescue does have a deep root system and enhances drought resistance. If you wanted to, this is a picture from another colleague's house property, and she used this finely fescue to fill in an area between the sidewalk and a planting bed. So 5 pounds of that will cover about 1,000 square feet and an estimated cost of about $35. Micro clover is really in the news if you go out and search at lawn alternatives. It's drought resistance and all of those advantages that I've got listed on the side there. I won't go and read every one of them. You can grow micro clover as a standalone crop, or like that's the only crop, but that's not really recommended. If there are disadvantages to doing it that way, really the recommendation is to overseed this type of clover into an existing lawn. And for 1,000 square feet of lawn, a pound bag would cost about $30. And you would seed that when you aerated. Usually you would aerate in the fall, and then you could overseed with the micro clover and add some compost to that. And actually your fertilizer reductions are, you get a reduction in the amount of fertilizer that's needed because clover helps fix nitrogen in the soil so that your fertilizer requirements will be lower. Okay, here are some resources for plant selection. The one in the middle is Plant Nova Natives. That's the one that I mentioned specifically. It has a listing of planting in dry shade, planting in a sunny spot. It's very helpful, got some great pictures and great suggestions. The other two publications are also very good. And if you've been doing any research, there are really a lot of sources for plant selections. This is the native plants for Northern Virginia is one that I personally rely pretty heavily on. All right. Now, so you've got your plants, you've considered all of the site selections, you've got then your soil test, and you're ready to move. So how do you actually remove some of that grass? Well, the first transition technique that I'll talk about is smothering, a way to smother the lawn. And as you follow kind of the prescription down the line, you lay down layers of newspaper or a layer of unwaxed cardboard, and cover it with 2 to 4 inches of compost. It's going to take about 6 or 8 weeks, but the grass will die as the newspaper or cardboard slowly disintegrates. And if you want to plant flowers or shrubs, you can dig a hole, at the time you do this, through the newspapers and plant right then. And then you can use that to expand that same technique to expand that area of planting as you get better ideas or more ideas about plants that you want to add to your garden. All right, this is an example from my life. This is something that I did after attending the Master Gardener training, and one of the motivators for me was I had a terrific grass lawn, but I planted a tree, and then after a couple of years of the tree being there, it was not such a great lawn around the tree. It was really dying. I was trying to add. I didn't know what to add. I didn't know fertilizers or compost. I didn't know what to do, and with the training, we had an opportunity to take soil tests. I took soil tests, and I found that the soil in my front yard was just perfect for grass. So I didn't have a soil problem relative to grass, but what I did have was the tree being much more stronger than the grass. This is a red maple that I planted, and the root system was on the red maple is relatively close to the surface. It was really interfering with the grass, and so I had to do something. All right, so this is a shot before, and I had decided that I was going to eliminate the area around the tree, replace it with something other than grass. This is what I did as step one. I got some landscape fabric, and I laid it down in the area that I planned to transition to non-turf. If I were going to do this again, if I were going to do it again, I would probably use the newspaper, or because then I wouldn't have had to go back later and pick it up. Although an advantage of using this landscape fabric is that it's porous, so it will continue to let water into that area and not threaten the tree root system, and it will kill the grass under the area. All right, mulch is readily available in both Alexandria and Arlington County. This is the way that I got the mulch from the site in Alexandria to my house. I took my car down there. I loaded up a couple of garbage cans full and made several trips. And I edged around, completed the area that I wanted to transfer to non-lawn purposes, and began to put the mulch on top. The entire thing cost me about $22, but that doesn't include the gas going back and forth to the mulch site. I think I did 11 trips. So there was some additional cost for that, but fairly inexpensive to do this. And this is what it looked like afterwards. Then I decided that I wanted to also have a garden. This is the no-till garden technique. You don't have to till up a big area to plant a garden. I had some tomato plants, so I actually dug holes in the ground where I wanted those tomato plants to be. And I had a good idea. I knew that this was the only area really available to me because that's where I could get 6 to 8 hours of sun to grow the vegetables like tomatoes that need that much sun. The cost of doing that was about $30 to $50. It was an 8 by 10 foot area covered with 3 inches of compost, 10 40-pound bags of compost. It was $3 to $5 a bag. I checked before doing this presentation, so between $30 and $50. And then I framed it. And this is the video that I talked about at the University of Maryland website that you can go back and take a look at. Okay. All right, this is another thing that I did with smothering. Okay, the picture on the left, this is a non-native invasive plant that I put in defensively, but it took over. And as you could see, I couldn't get to anything. I used that smothering technique to get rid of that grass. Actually, I left the tarp and the compost on top of that, or mulch rather, on top of that for the better part of a year. And then The corner there that you see where the rocks are in the right-hand corner, left-hand corner rather, I couldn't get to that space anyhow to care for grass very effectively. So I chose rocks, and now I don't have to water that at all. Solarization is another way that you can, it's similar to smothering, except you use clear plastic and you 1 millimeter thick, you cover the area that you want to have your turf removed. And as it says, it's best done during the hottest part of the year. Because it gets so hot, it reaches a fairly high temperature that can cause your soil underneath to reach a fairly high temperature. It does kill some annual weeds and some perennial weeds as well, and controls some non-beneficial insects or life like nematodes. Okay, I've saved the hardest thing for last. Is if you're going to actually remove the sod. If you have a smaller area, you can do that with a garden spade. You can slide the top with a garden spade under the top 1 to 2 inches of soil, and then just you take the sod up, and after you're finished with removing the sod, well, you set the sod aside because you want to really use the dirt that's in that sod. Set the sod aside to let the grass die. You can then return the dirt to your bed, and then you can mulch right away and plant to minimize the chance that weeds are coming back. If you have more than 100 square feet that you're going to do, I would really recommend renting a power sod cutter, and then follow the same steps. And I've done both of these, and they're effective, but they are hard work. Okay, who can help? As I mentioned, the Virginia Cooperative Extension, Horticulture Help Desk, Plant Nova Natives, which I said is one of my favorite sources for helping me figure out what plants to plant. And Audubon at Home, you can actually connect with them and they'll come out and give you some ideas of how you can make your home more attractive to birds and wildlife. Okay, and I think and that's it. That'll be it for today. Renee?
Thank you for all that. Now we're going to go with some questions that have been put on the chat. The first one is from Meg. It says, are there any carex species that will thrive in full or part shade?
Well, I think the Carex that was shown in that slide, the Carex pennsylvanica, that will work in that condition. I have some Carex plantagenea that I have planted in an area in my yard that's another Carex, and it does get some sun, but it's mostly shade, so that's another thing that will work. Plantagenea, Carex plantagenea.
Okay. And another part of that question is, what turf alternatives can stand up to dog traffic?
Well, as I think I mentioned a couple of times, it's, if you have a lot of tough traffic, if you need an area, a play area for children, for pets, turf grass is your better selection. I don't have a recommendation for a non-turf grass that stands up to heavy foot traffic, and that also allows you to enjoy that, using that area as a play area. I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you for that. We have a question from Marlene. It says, what is the issue with using waxed cardboard for smothering, and can solarization be done with dark plastic?
I think the preference for unwaxed cardboard is because then you don't have the wax substance that then you're trying to, what you want that cardboard to do is disintegrate and really become part of the the soil structure. If you've got wax cardboard, that makes that process more difficult. And since I haven't actually tried it, I don't know if it's impossible for the waxy substance to be incorporated over time, but the recommendation is just to use unwaxed cardboard. And then relative to solarization, yes, you could use black plastic. It doesn't raise the soil temperature to as high as using clear plastic, but you could use black plastic.
Okay. Now we have a question from Susan. Any uses suggested for a collection of crushed eggshells?
A collection of crushed eggshells. Well, I know that, incorporating crushed shells into a compost pile might work. But you know what? I'm going beyond what I think I really feel confident about saying something about. I don't have an idea on the crushed egg cells.
Okay. Now we have another question from Meg. What are your views on zoysia?
Zoysia is a warm season grass. So unlike what I mentioned, tall fescues and Kentucky bluegrass, which are really cool season grasses, zoysia is a warm season grass. And so the times that you would plant it, the times that you would fertilize and care for it are different. You do that in the heat of the summer as opposed to in the fall or in the spring. If you need it has good qualities in that it's a tough lawn, and so if you're using part of your yard area for a lawn, for those like a play area or a walkway or a creating a garden room, I think zoysia in this climate could be a good choice. I have part of a lawn. Part of my lawn actually is zoysia. I have actually been neglecting it, but actually that speaks for it because I have been neglecting it. It still keeps coming back every year. It does get brown in the winter, but during the summertime, it's very heat tolerant and drought tolerant.
Thank you for that. Now we have a question from Susan. Are free trees available in Falls Church City? I'm
not aware of a tree giveaway program in Falls Church City. I'm sorry, I just don't know. And the ones in Arlington and Alexandria, they are, targeting citizens of Arlington and or Alexandria. I'll have to look into that. I'm sorry, I don't know.
Okay, thank you. And the last question is from Mimi. It says, what can you use for shady areas instead of lawn?
Well, if we go back to the presentation, there are a couple of areas like the one slide that I showed of my colleague's place where she had planted some, what was it, Kalmia, which was a shrub. I'm trying to think in my own lawn where I have, I'm drawing a little bit of a blank. Some of the Caryxes that we talked about, those are good for shady parts of the lawn. And I guess I can't go back to that slide. I think there were half a dozen suggestions on plants for shady areas.
Okay, thank you. I think we have all our questions. I think we're going to go to George now to give us the closing of our presentation. Go ahead, George.
Yes. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much. It's been wonderful. Thank you so much, Donald. Applause to you. And, we have a landing page for master gardeners. If you guys want more information, they have a lot of information in the landing page. So please visit that. We also have another exhibitors ready to talk to you. We have zoning people live right now. If you have any zoning question, ready to answer your questions that sometimes you want to call and there is a go to extension 1, go to extension 2 today. No, they are live in there answering your questions. So please, we have all the other exhibitors too. Some of them, they are live right now. This is the time to ask questions. Please don't be shy. And Donald, that would be wonderful, and thank you so much, and see you in the next workshop, or just go into the other web pages. Okay, thank
Okay.
you.
Thanks very much, Jorge.
Have a good day.
Thank you, everybody.